It was just a stop. Exit 72. Somewhere off a long stretch of highway that cuts across the state like a scar. He'd been driving for hours. Not in a rush. Just moving. The man was dressed neatly. Slacks, collared shirt, polished shoes. He always dressed that way. Even when he didn't have to. Especially when traveling. Not because he wanted to impress anyone. But because he knew, for him, perception could be protection. He parked. Checked his phone. Slid his briefcase into the back seat. Stepped out to stretch. The air was still. The sun, hot but not cruel. A few cars. A vending machine, humming, beside the restroom building. That's when the cruiser pulled up. It wasn't fast. Wasn't loud. Just deliberate. 2 officers. White. One older. One barely out of training. You could tell by the walk. They got out. Looked at him. Didn't say hello. License and registration. One said flatly. He raised a brow. I'm not operating the vehicle. I just stepped out. Don't get smart, the other barked. That was the moment he felt it. The shift. The air changed. The line between question and accusation blurred. He reached for his wallet. Slowly, one of them shouted. They both placed their hands on their holsters. He froze. Raised his hands. Voice calm. I'm complying. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that they had already decided. He was a problem. Next thing he knew, he was on the ground. Face pressed to gravel. A knee in his back. They claimed he resisted. He hadn't. They claimed he was uncooperative. He wasn't. They asked what he was doing there. He told them, I'm on my way to court. They laughed. Yeah? What are you? A lawyer. He didn't answer. Not because he couldn't, but because he knew they didn't really want to know. They wanted control. To assert it. To prove it. They found nothing illegal in his car. His plates were clean. No warrants. No violations. But they still cuffed him. Escorted him to the back of the cruiser. The ride was short. The silence long. At the station, no questions. No Miranda. No paperwork. Just a cold bench. Fluorescent lighting. Buzzing overhead. And the sound of laughter down the hallway. He sat. Waited. Watched the clock tick past midnight. Still no explanation. No lawyer. No phone call. He didn't fight. Didn't shout. Didn't give them what they wanted. Because he already knew something they didn't. He knew who he was. And he knew where he was supposed to be the next morning. In a robe. Behind a bench. Holding a gavel. The morning sun had barely crept over the trees. Birds chirped in the distance. Coffee brewed behind the front desk of the station. But inside, it was still cold. A young officer opened the cell. Didn't make eye contact. Didn't say sorry. Just muttered. You can go. No charges. No explanation. No paperwork. The man rose slowly. Rolled his shoulders. Stiff. Sore. He asked calmly. Is there a report I can take with me? The officer hesitated. Then shook his head. Nah. Nothing on file. Just like that, the night disappeared. Like it never happened. But it did. And he remembered every second of it. Outside, his car was still parked at the rest stop. He had to Uber there. The driver was silent the whole way. When he got in the car, he sat for a moment. Pulled down the visor. Checked the mirror. A faint red mark still across his cheekbone. He adjusted his collar. Straightened his tie. Took a deep breath. Then turned the key. The drive to the courthouse was smooth. Same roads. Same highway. Same exit signs. But this time, everything felt different. He wasn't nervous. Wasn't angry. He was ready. Because justice was a language he spoke fluently. At the courthouse, his assistant met him at the door. Morning, Judge Simmons. He nodded. Soft smile. I'm all right. You good to preside today? She asked, eyeing him. He nodded again. More than ever. She handed him the docket. A list of hearings. Civil, traffic. Internal affairs. He froze at the last name. Officers Trent and Mallory, departmental review. He read it twice. Same names. Same badge numbers. The men from last night. She didn't notice his reaction. Just added, it's a public misconduct hearing. Some press might be there. He handed her back the folder. I'll be on time. Meanwhile, across the city, the two officers were sitting in a cramped waiting room. They hadn't slept either. Word had gotten around. A complaint had been filed. Apparently by someone connected. Bet it's just a slap on the wrist, Trent mumbled. Probably internal, Mallory agreed. No way it goes public. They had no idea. No clue who the man was. No clue where they were headed. Until the bailiff opened the door. Courtroom 3C. Judge Simmons is presiding. They walked in. Casual. Confident. Then they saw him. At the bench. In a black robe. Calm. Collected. It was him. The man from the rest stop. The one they cuffed. Shoved. Silenced. Mallory's eyes widened. Trent blinked, unsure if it was real. He didn't smirk. Didn't gloat. Judge Simmons simply looked up and said, "Be seated." The courtroom was quiet. A few journalists scribbling notes. A photographer clicked once and backed out. The clerk read the case summary aloud. Departmental review of officers Kyle Trent and Brian Mallory, charged with violating internal conduct standards following an incident at Rest Stop 72. Allegations include racial profiling, unlawful detention, and failure to document arrest procedure. The officers shifted in their seats. Trent tried to clear his throat. Mallory stared at the table. Judge Simmons tapped the gavel once. "I trust both officers are aware of the allegations." They both nodded slowly. He continued, "You are entitled to a fair review, to representation, to truth." Then he paused. "But unlike yesterday, in this courtroom, you will not speak over anyone. You will not intimidate anyone. And you will follow every rule, exactly as written." He looked up. "Is that clear?" Neither of them answered. So he repeated it. "Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," they mumbled in unison. That moment spread like wildfire. Clips from the courtroom hit the internet before the hearing even ended. Judge presides over misconduct case involving his own arrest. Poetic justice in real time. From handcuffed to honorable. Some people called it karma. Others called it grace. But for Judge Simmons, it was just Tuesday. He didn't disqualify himself. He didn't make it personal. He let the system play out. The same system that had failed him just 24 hours earlier. And that's what made it all the more powerful. The room was still. The kind of stillness that sits in your lungs. Not tension. Not yet. But something close to it. Judge Simmons adjusted his glasses. Looked down at the docket. Then up at the officers seated before him. He didn't blink much. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Let's proceed," he said calmly. The departmental investigator took the stand first. A neutral party. No uniform. Just facts. "We received a formal complaint regarding Officer Trent and Officer Mallory involving an incident at Rest Stop 72. He described the timeline. 8:14 p.m., cruiser stops at the rest area. 8:17 p.m., contact made with civilian. 8:20 p.m., subject is handcuffed and detained. 9:02 p.m., subject transported to holding. No charge filed. No incident report logged. Is that standard procedure?" Simmons asked. "No, Your Honor. A detention without a written report or any probable cause is a violation of protocol." Trent scratched his temple. Mallory stared at the wall. Next, dashcam footage was played. No narration. Just the raw feed. The officers approaching a man standing beside his car. The man keeping his hands visible. Answering questions clearly. And then shouting. Aggressive commands. Forcible restraint. Gasps in the gallery. Someone whispered, "They really did that?" Still, Simmons showed no reaction. Just took notes. Then came the officer's defense. Trent took the stand first. "We believed he was acting suspicious. Didn't identify himself right away." Simmons looked up. "You believed. But did you see him commit any violation of law?" Trent hesitated. "Well, not exactly. But his behavior was non-compliant." "Yes. And how did he fail to comply?" Trent fumbled for words. He was slow to give ID. And he gave us attitude. Simmons raised an eyebrow. Did he threaten you? No. Did he resist arrest? No. Did you find any illegal items in his possession? No. Simmons leaned back. I see. Next was Mallory. He tried to shift blame. I was just backing up my partner. He called it in. I followed. So you never personally felt threatened? No. You followed his lead? Yes, Your Honor. So if your partner had pulled a weapon, you would have too? Mallory paused. I suppose so. Simmons didn't smile. Didn't flinch. Just let the silence hang. Then came a surprise witness. The Uber driver. The man who picked Simmons up that morning. He testified that the judge told him calmly what had happened the night before. Didn't complain. Didn't curse the officers. Just sat quietly in the back seat, adjusting his tie. He told me, the driver said, I have court in a few hours. I need to be ready. And that silence. That was what stunned the courtroom. More footage was shown. A traffic camera catching the moment the officers shoved Simmons against the car. A witness statement from a woman using the restroom at the time. She'd heard the yelling. Said it made her sick to her stomach. Said the man never raised his voice. Only the cops did. The courtroom was now a sea of murmurs. The press outside had doubled. Social media clips were exploding. Judge cross-examines the man who cuffed him. He never raised his voice once. But inside, it was still business. Simmons called a short recess. Everyone stood. He exited the bench. Back in chambers, his assistant brought him water. You okay? He nodded. This isn't about me. It's about the law, and whether it works for everyone. When court resumed, Simmons sat a little straighter. We'll now hear final remarks. The investigator gave a brief conclusion. The evidence is clear. These officers violated conduct policy and engaged in racial profiling. I recommend disciplinary review. Trent looked up. Mallory shifted uncomfortably. They were no longer confident. They were quiet. Simmons looked at them. You will have a chance to speak on your own behalf. Neither of them did. Not because they weren't allowed, but because, for the first time, they had nothing to say. Simmons tapped the gavel once. This hearing is adjourned. A decision will be issued within 48 hours. He stood. The room stood with him. He exited the bench. No nod. No smug look. Just purpose. Because what had just happened wasn't revenge. It was justice, done right. The hearing ended, but the story hadn't. Across the city and across the internet, people waited. Commentators on the news dissected the footage. Clips from the courtroom were replayed over and over. Social media feeds were flooded with the same question. What will Judge Simmons decide? But inside his chambers, there was no frenzy, no celebration, just quiet. He sat at his desk, not to punish, not to make an example, but to do it right. He reviewed every transcript, every second of dash cam footage, every testimony, every pause, every contradiction. And when he finally wrote his decision, it wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was clear. The next morning, the ruling was released to the department and the public. One line stood out in bold. Officers Kyle Trent and Brian Mallory are found in violation of departmental conduct regarding the unlawful detainment and racial profiling of a civilian. A suspension without pay is ordered pending full review. Additional sensitivity and bias training is mandated. Simple, measured, unshakable. Trent read the report in silence. Mallory swore under his breath. Neither of them spoke publicly. No press statement. No apology. But inside the department, people were talking. A veteran officer was overheard saying, "If a black man in a robe can stay calm after that, we better be ready to check ourselves." And they were right. At the courthouse, reporters gathered outside. Judge Simmons arrived through the back. Didn't take questions. Didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't need to, because the ruling spoke for itself. Inside his chambers, his assistant handed him a printed email. Subject, thank you. From a mother whose teenage son had once been stopped in the same county. She wrote, they told him he was out of place. He was just walking home. That night broke him. But your story? What you did in that courtroom? It gave him something to believe in again. Simmons read it twice, then placed it in a drawer. He didn't need the spotlight, but he welcomed the change it might bring. The local news aired a special segment that night. A judge, a rest stop, and the power of restraint. Clips played in order. The footage. The courtroom. The verdict. A commentator said, "He didn't just rule with fairness. He showed us what fairness looks like under pressure." Elsewhere, people protested. But this time, not out of anger. They marched in support. Signs held high. Dignity is resistance. Judge Simmons, strength in silence. Let the gavel speak. He never attended the marches, never tweeted, never went live. But the impact was already moving on its own. Law students studied the case. Some schools updated their legal ethics curriculum to include it. A professor at Howard Law said, "You can teach statutes and precedents. But this is what justice under fire looks like." Later that week, the officers appealed. They hired legal representation, claimed bias, claimed the judge should have recused himself. But their appeal didn't hold. Why? Because Simmons had documented every step. He had made his conduct impeccable, unshakable. He had, once again, proven that law wasn't about emotion. It was about truth. In the aftermath, Internal Affairs issued a new protocol. Mandatory reporting for all field arrests. Quarterly reviews of dashcam footage. Updated bias training for all officers. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And it started with him. When asked weeks later if he'd do it all the same way again, Simmons replied, "Every word, every minute, every decision, yes." And when asked how he managed to stay calm through it all, he said, "Because they expected me to explode. They didn't expect me to stay still and make the system work against them." The story spread beyond the state. National news picked up. A documentary crew requested to interview him. He declined. His only public statement was a letter. It read, "To those who feel silenced, you are not alone. To those who abuse power, your time is always shorter than you think. And to every officer of the law, may you never forget who the law was meant to serve." That letter was framed, placed inside the lobby of the courthouse. Below it, a plaque. "Fairness, even when it hurts." People stopped to read it. Young lawyers, judges in training, visitors who had no idea what happened at Exit 72. They read it, and then they understood. Weeks passed. The courthouse fell back into rhythm. Hearings resumed. Cases filed. People walked in and out like they always had. But something was different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like the quiet shift in weight before a storm, or the silence after a truth lands so heavy no one dares speak. Judge Simmons returned to his bench every morning, on time, prepared, professional. But now, every officer who entered his courtroom stood a little straighter. Every lawyer reviewed their facts twice. Every clerk watched, quietly taking notes, not just on the law, but on how he upheld it. He never mentioned the arrest again, never brought up the hearing, never once referred to that night. But no one forgot, because the gavel doesn't forget, and neither did the people. Around the country, the ripple effect continued. Police departments held town halls. Some introduced mandatory de-escalation recertifications. Others rewrote internal policies on nonviolent stops. One sheriff in Oregon told his department, "If you ever doubt the weight of your badge, remember this. A judge once sat in cuffs because two men forgot their duty. Don't be them." In classrooms, young black students studied the case, not just for legal precedent, but for power. Because for once, the story didn't end in a hashtag. It didn't end in blood, or a body cam shut off too soon. It ended in truth, in professionalism, in poise. They wrote essays. They wrote poems. One young girl wrote, "They thought he was just a man at a rest stop, but he was the stop sign, and they blew through him until he made them stop for real." Simmons never took credit. He declined awards, ignored offers for interviews, and continued showing up, case by case, fact by fact, because the law was never about spotlight. It was about balance, and he had become that balance. One afternoon, months later, a woman approached him outside the courthouse. She looked familiar. Turns out, she had been at the rest stop the night he was arrested. She saw it happen from a distance. Didn't know who he was. She said, "I wanted to help, but I froze. I've felt guilty ever since." Simmons nodded gently. "No need to feel guilty. You remembered. And you're still here. That matters." Then he added, "The fight isn't always in the moment. Sometimes it's in what you build after." She smiled through tears. Back in his chambers, he stood by the window, watched people moving below, some running, some arguing, some laughing. And he thought, they don't know who I am. They don't know what happened. But that's okay, because they walk freely through the same doors he fought to protect. And that was enough. On the 1-year anniversary of the hearing, a law student delivered a speech. She said, "In a time where voices are loud, and injustice is louder, Judge Simmons taught us something rare. That power, when wielded calmly, can echo louder than rage. That justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply shows up, in a robe, with a gavel, and remembers everything." And that's where we leave him. Not with applause, not with viral fame, but with legacy. A black man stopped at a rest area, stood up the next day, and held the very system that once tried to humiliate him to a higher standard. He didn't break it. He didn't burn it down. He used it. And because he did, others will too. This is Black Untold Stories. Because justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just speaks last. Subscribe for more stories like this.